Hello, I'm Riz Khan. The Middle East stands at a precarious moment within a cycle of bloody violence, as an escalating round of deadly strikes are met with counter-strikes, outrage and threats of revenge. Well, many years ago I interviewed both the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyah, and the former Israeli Prime Minister, Shimon Peres, on a single episode of my show. Last night, as my team completed the latest episode of my new show, Ismail Haniyah was reported as assassinated in Tehran, while a senior Hezbollah commander was killed in Beirut, with Israeli involvement suspected in the first event and announced in the other. By chance, our latest show focused on the perilous prospect for peace and the real risk of regional escalation, with three experts offering different perspectives and context on a troubling time. In such a fast-moving news cycle, it seems even more pertinent than before. Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Welcome to the show. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu returned from his trip to the US facing threats on four fronts: Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis and Harris. At the weekend, Hezbollah denied launching a missile which killed 12 children who were playing football at a Druze town in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Prime Minister Netanyahu promised a severe response, while the US cautioned against escalation. On the same day, Palestinian children were among 30 people killed by Israeli airstrikes that hit a school in Gaza. The Israeli authorities claimed they were attacking a Hamas command center. Meanwhile, Israel bombed a port in Yemen after Houthis launched a deadly drone strike that managed to evade Israeli defenses and hit Tel Aviv. And from an ocean away, the words of the US Vice President Kamala Harris hinted at a possible shift in tone as she began her campaign for the presidency. After meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu in Washington, she vowed not to be silent about Palestinian suffering in Gaza and said it was time for him to get a ceasefire deal done. Well, during the same period, there was a breakthrough in talks that brought bitter rivals around the negotiating table to resolve two major differences affecting the region. China brokered a deal in which Hamas, Fatah, and a dozen other Palestinian factions committed to a power-sharing unity government in Gaza when the war ends. And the Saudi government was credited with brokering an agreement between the Yemeni government that it supports and the Iranian-backed Houthis to end a battle for control over the country's banks and financial institutions that's been crippling the country's economy. At a fast-moving moment in the Middle East, we've lined up a trio of guests with intimate knowledge of the region to analyze the causes and consequences of these developments. First up is Manuel Hassassian, the former Palestinian ambassador to the UK, who's now ambassador to Denmark. Ambassador, I want to thank you very much for joining us. And I guess the opening question would be, why did Fatah agree to a power-sharing unity government with Hamas in Gaza after the war?
Well, actually, this is not the first time that we have responded to such queries, because for the last several years, there have been attempts by Arab governments, including Saudi Arabia, Algiers, and what have you, to bring the Hamas back to the power structure of the PLO and to stop, being, as separatists as they have been so far. And we need to have this national accord government. So as you know, Hamas will be part and parcel of the overall political system, let alone it has to accept the PLO's conditions of a two-state solution, of finality of conflict with Israel and what have you. So for this reason, I think Fatah, accepted to go to Beijing and upon the request of the Chinese government, along with Hamas. But as you know, nothing is going to happen until there is a ceasefire and this war ends. Before that, we cannot see any kind of an agreement for a national accord government.
Understood. Well, I guess, Ambassador, the eventual aim would then be to have a unity government to include all the Palestinian territories, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, in a two-state solution?
Yes. First of all, Hamas has to accept a two-state solution. They have to accept that our borders will be the 1967 borders. Hamas should be an integral part of the Palestinian, structure, whether social and what have you. And in the final analysis, they have to succumb to the political program of the PLO. And that in itself are the conditions. If they don't accept that, then there will never be an agreement.
Understood. Now, Israel and the US have repeatedly vowed that a terrorist organization, which is how they describe Hamas, cannot be a part of any post-conflict administration in Gaza. Do you expect them to compromise, or would Hamas have to officially recognize Israel and renounce violence for that to happen?
Well, once the war is over and Hamas accepts the conditions of ceasefire and accepts the conditions basically of being part and parcel of the PLO, okay, then Hamas is no more considered to be a militant group. They have to be part of the political structure of the PLO, let alone later elections will take place and they will be part of the electoral process because they are part and parcel of Palestinian society. Now, my question to the United States and the EU, for almost over 25 years, the PLO was a terrorist organization, and eventually, you know, Rabin and Chairman Arafat, our president, late president, you know, they shook hands at the White House lawn. So what's the big deal? This is deja vu, my friend.
Okay, well, the Palestinian Authority does depend on funding from the US and the international community. Now, if they don't support this agreement, could those funders just threaten to withdraw financial support, and that would be the end of it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, they have tried so in the past. In 2006, when Hamas won the elections, the legislative elections, immediately the US, Europe stopped funding President Abbas. So, I mean, and they stopped funding the Palestinian Authority. So, what was the purpose of boycotting and not funding, you know, President Abbas at a time when Hamas was not in the government? They were just being elected in the Legislative Council, and that imposition, you know, of not funding the Palestinian Authority took place. After a year, they have rescinded from that decision, and they started, you know, supporting President Abbas against the wish and will, of course, of Hamas at that time. So, I mean, such tactics and maneuvers is not going to end this conflict. And if we believe in a two-state solution, I think, you know, this kind of policy is going to make it impossible for a two-state solution. And that's why it will exacerbate, you know, the cycle of violence between Palestinians and Israelis. So if they believe in a two-state solution, they have to push all parties to come to the negotiating table, and they should not use any kind of flexing muscles against the Palestinian Authority, let alone the PLO, in order basically to punish it in a collective punishment for such an accord that is needed to happen. Or else, you know, our society would be totally divided. We don't want a divided society. We want one flag, one gun, one authority to rule. And Hamas, if accepts all the conditions that we have put as PLO, ahlan wa sahlan, we say.
Well, you say that, Ambassador. Now, there have been previous unsuccessful attempts to reconcile Hamas and Fatah. So what's the reason for optimism that there could be something different this time?
Let me tell you. My answer to you reminds me of one of Italian philosopher whom I very like, Antonio Gramsci. You know what he says? He says there is always the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the goodwill. Nobody is optimistic, but we cannot continue to be pessimistic. We have to be optimist in order things to roll down. Now, I can't guarantee whether the National Accord government is going to happen. I can't guarantee if Hamas will continue basically its commitments, you know, to what resolutions came out from Peking. Nobody can predict the future. You know, Israel is trying basically to put stumbling blocks and hurdles for such unity and to continue with its war by pretending that Hamas are still the militias threatening its security, by flattening Gaza. If I want to go through the statistics, I mean, you know it, Mr. Khan. You know the statistics. You know exactly what is happening in Gaza. This is a war of genocide. It's total annihilation of a people. I mean, you flatten 70% of the infrastructure in Gaza. You make people, you know, now starve. Children are starving. Hundreds of thousands, you know, have been injured and maimed. 40,000 have been massacred and killed, you know, and the saga continues. Where is the position of the international community? Where is the position of EU and the United States? I think their position epitomizes best today as really a contradiction to truth and humanity, Mr. Khan. So we have to stop this carnage. The international community should take a firmer stand. And Israel is a war criminal. And there has been, resolutions coming from the ICJ and the ICC.
It's
I mean,
interesting.
what else do we need in order to indict Israel as an occupying force? When is this conflict going to end?
But that's what I was actually going to touch on, Ambassador. As ever in international relations, timing is key. So I'm wondering what sense you have that the international community now has more sympathy for the Palestinian plight due to the civilian suffering in Gaza, and again, perhaps reinforced by that recent declaration to which you referred, the International Court of Justice, saying that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories is unlawful.
Well, let me say first, from the beginning of October 7 until today, we have seen quantum leap of public opinion that is in favor of Palestine and in ending this conflict. There has been 140 countries who have accepted Palestine and recognized Palestine. There are many countries who are putting efforts, like in Europe, Ireland, Spain, and what have you, in recognizing the state of Palestine. We have seen mounting pressure, on Israel from European countries, let alone, I'm not going to talk about Middle East, Asia, and what have you. So we can feel the empathy and the sympathy and the strong support that has been mustered all over the world for the Palestinians to have their own independence and to end this war and come up with a two-state solution. Look, what is happening in the West Bank also should not be underestimated. The killings of people, the maiming, the expansion of settlements, the rule of gun-ho mentality by the settlers. Even the United States had condemned the settlers for their violence and for the taking lands by force in the West Bank to build more settlements. And there is, a big fuss about this now. The ICJ and the ICC rulings, have been interpreted as positive to end this occupation and to put pressure on Netanyahu, who is exacerbating this conflict for his own interest. He wants to stay in power. Everybody knows the name of the game. And what happened in the Congress is a total farce. When we see, all these senators and congressmen, every single minute, giving him a standing ovation and applaud for his continuous lies that have been exposed so well in his speech, by the people all over the world. And still, he's having the support because I'm sorry to say that the United States of America is totally controlled by the Zionist lobby of AIPAC and the Christian Zionists. And that's why, they have a say-so in the upcoming elections. But I must say that also the Arabs and the Palestinians have a say-so in the upcoming elections on November 5 in the United States.
But it's interesting, sorry, but Ambassador, the interesting thing is, you're right, eyes turn to the West and the US in particular when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian situation. This agreement was signed in Beijing, and I wonder what made China suddenly the power broker in this negotiation?
I tell you, this is not the first time that China has showed support. But of course, China is considered to be in the axis of evil as far as the United States is concerned, that they are, coalescing basically with Putin, with Russia, let alone Iran and what have you. So, of course, the US felt a little bit, out of the game because the United States had failed dismally as an honest broker of peace for the last 30 years in being the gavel holder for a two-state solution. Now they see a big power like China intervening and bringing the contending parties within the Palestinian society together. It's against their policies. They want us to be divided and rule. And that's why I think, Peking wanted to show the good intentions that they are willing to bring the Palestinians together and have a negotiated settlement based on the two-state solution that has been accepted by the international community.
So it's interesting.
Besides that, what is the purpose of Beijing basically in this?
It means
It's clear.
interesting global dynamics taking place right now. Almost the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of situation from what you're saying. But I wonder, turning to another issue, Benjamin Netanyahu's back in Israel after a high-profile visit to the U.S., in which he addressed Congress, as you'd indicated, and he met Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris. Did he return home stronger or weaker as a prime minister, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, this is a question that the Israelis and Netanyahu could assess. I cannot assess it. But I must say that he was not very, very much welcomed by Kamala Harris. And of course, Biden is exiting. And Biden, has said it, he's a Zionist. So we don't question the relationship of Netanyahu to Biden. But we question the relationship of Netanyahu to Trump, which is, a hate-love relationship. As we have seen, at one time he did not even shake hands, and later he invites him to his home in Florida and tries to show him hospitality and what have you. He's using also Netanyahu for his upcoming elections, Trump. But Trump is unreliable, and I think Netanyahu knows that. Although most political analysts, they say, if Trump comes, Netanyahu is going to get everything. I doubt that.
Now,
but when it comes to Kamala Harris, I tell you, Kamala Harris is under she has said it that she wants this war to stop. She said that occupation cannot continue. She said that, eventually there should be a negotiated settlement. And she showed some empathy to the Palestinian people. She was not as warm as the other U.S. officials. So if she wins these elections, I don't think Netanyahu will be in the driver's seat.
Well, interesting now. So to what degree might this represent a significant shift in the sentiment when it comes to the long-running Israeli-Palestinian situation?
Well, let me tell you, everybody is getting bored with this question. Everybody is getting upset. The Middle East cannot be stable unless there is a unless there is a peaceful solution, because there will never be a military solution to this conflict by Israel. And the two-state solution is the only talk in town, which is viable solution. And the Americans know that. There is no status quo plus by Israeli occupying force to the West Bank and Jerusalem. I must admit that. Immediate ceasefire. This is a genocide against humanity. Everybody is asking for that. And the deaf silence of European Western governments on Gaza has been proven to the world the graveyard for children, women, and the elderly. Everybody knows exactly what the solution is, but nobody is really bold enough to come up and say, we have to change this state of mind, this state of being, and accept the realities. And the realities should be pragmatic. And being pragmatic is choosing between constraints. And this is what the Israelis and the Americans should understand in order to solve this conflict. But without solving this conflict, there is no peace and stability in the Middle East, my friend.
But Ambassador, there are those who say surely no American president is going to waver from America's support of Israel's right to defend itself. Plus, Kamala Harris's husband is Jewish and a campaigner against anti-Semitism. So, are you being overly optimistic to expect that much change?
No, I'm not overly optimistic. I'm just stating the facts. What we see, Kamala Harris cannot be subdued to her husband's. She has to represent the interests of the United States of America. Now, I'm not saying that America is going to abandon Israel. Israel is a strategic ally. Americans, one of their cornerstones in the Middle East, in terms of foreign policy, since the Truman administration until today, is unequivocally support the state of Israel, because Israel is considered to be a satellite, a proxy regime to the United States' interests in the Middle East. But what we would like to see is the stop of war, ceasefire, and push for the end of occupation and the two-state solution. We are not asking Israel to quit or not to militarily. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that military and financially and politically, the United States cannot leave. It's an organic relationship. They will never leave the state of Israel undefended. We know that. But they have to shoulder the responsibility as the unipolar power and they have promised to end this conflict. This is what we are asking. Their obligations should be fulfilled under the rubric of a two-state solution, and not to continue with the killing. Because today the United States is considered basically to be a partner in killing and in this carnage that is going on in Gaza.
Now, we've had Israeli representatives on this show giving their perspective from, that Israeli side, and you explained what you feel Benjamin Netanyahu's motives are as well. But in effect, what is now holding up the ceasefire deal? And is the heightened tension between Israel and Hezbollah a distraction from ending the conflict in Gaza?
Well, actually, I don't see Netanyahu accepting the deal. He is procrastinating. He is putting new conditions once in a while because he wants to continue with the war on Gaza, this genocide. And at the same time, he is trying now to create problems with northern Palestine, with Hezbollah and what have you, because as long as war and instability continues, he is in the driver's seat. Why should he have the hostages released while he can still procrastinate and continue to be in power? He is controlling, he has the trump cards, and nobody is stopping him. And all these demonstrations in Tel Aviv and whatever did nothing to his status. Still the right-wing government is intact. Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they are still with Netanyahu. Settlers are with Netanyahu. Likud is with Netanyahu. So why should he release the hostages as long as he believes that eventually, if he can succeed in procrastination and in prolonging the war, he believes that his position politically will be stronger when he releases the hostages through a Hamas deal. Hamas is ready to release the hostages according to the deals put by President Joe Biden, and we haven't seen any move by the Israelis on this issue.
Apart from the pressure of the large death toll on the Palestinians in Gaza, many women and children, of course, as everyone knows, there is now growing fear and increasing pressure on Israel because of the worry that this could now extend into a bigger regional conflict. We're seeing Hezbollah more active, we're seeing the Houthis more active, and there's a fear that international players on a bigger scale might be pulled into a conflict.
Yes, I agree with you, and that's why I said it's in the hands of Israel. If they stop the war and there is ceasefire, and when the dust settles, everything should be negotiated, and eventually Houthis, Hezbollah, and all those groups who are in conflict with Israel will stop. And as I said earlier, the fulcrum of any stability in the Middle East is the ending of occupation and conflict. And if the ceasefire stops, the war on Gaza stops, Houthis will stop, Hezbollah will stop, and we go back to rationality. Back to rationality is that Israel has to understand that they cannot continue occupying Palestine forever.
Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective. Much appreciated.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.
War continues to rage in the Red Sea as the US-led alliance resists attacks on shipping by Houthi militia, an Iranian-backed group in Yemen. These drone and missile strikes have caused massive disruption to global shipping, and the Houthis have vowed to continue their campaign until Israel stops its assault on Gaza. But in recent weeks, the conflict escalated when a Houthi drone pierced Israeli defenses to conduct a deadly strike on Tel Aviv. Israel's response was to bomb a Houthi-held port, lighting up the night sky in Yemen. My next guest served as U.S. ambassador to Yemen under Barack Obama and had diplomatic roles from Riyadh to Jerusalem. He's senior vice president of the Middle East Institute, whose mission is to boost understanding between the U.S. and the region. Ambassador Gerald Firestein, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Pleasure to be with you today.
Now, there may be viewers watching who are familiar with the actions of the Houthis in the Red Sea, but they're unfamiliar with who they are as a people. So what should they know? Give us a kind of basic outline of the people.
Well, the Houthis are a small group, a clan, if you will, in northwestern Yemen. They are Hashemite, and they are a group of Shia, but they're not Shia as we think of them in Iran. This is a different sect, but nevertheless they associate themselves with Iran with Iranian Shia, and they harken back, if you will, to the days of the Imamate in Yemen, a theological group that ruled Yemen for hundreds of years until 1962, when they were replaced by today's Yemen Republic. And so they would like, in some ways, to reconstitute that former theocracy that ruled in at least northern Yemen for many, many years. They fought a number of battles against the government of Ali Abdullah Saleh early in the 21st century, and continued to amass power and influence until the Arab Spring, when Ali Abdullah Saleh was thrown out. And while they cooperated with the movement against Saleh, they broke with that movement and started what is now the Yemen Civil War in 2014, and it's been going for nearly 10 years now.
Right. Well, they are, as you mentioned with Iran, they're often described as an Iranian proxy group, but it isn't as simple as that, is it? Now, how dependent are the Houthis on Iran, and how independent are they perhaps in their actions?
Well, it's a very good question, and people spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. I mean, fundamentally, the relationship between Iran and the Houthis was not strong until really about 10 years ago. And at that point, the Iranians identified the Houthis, some say because they wanted to help the Houthis get control of the Bab el-Mandeb, the narrow strait in the Red Sea, that would give them the chokehold on the international trade and commerce. And so they began to provide money and training and weapons that's continued to this day. And the Houthis have moved much closer, but as you said, they're not 100% dependent. And I think that the general consensus is that the Houthis are going to pursue what they believe is their own best interest, which is to get control of Yemen. If it works for cooperation with Iran, that's great. But if the Houthis decide that they have interests otherwise, they would pursue that.
Ambassador, how are they managing to conduct such an effective operation of disruption in the face of resistance by a powerful military alliance that's been led by the U.S.?
Well, it's, deterring the Houthis is very difficult. And of course, we've tried to do it through the use of air power. The Houthis survived and prospered over a period of about 7 years when the Saudis were carrying out almost daily air attacks. And so the Houthis, although they have sophisticated weaponry and they've demonstrated strong capability to use those weapons, nevertheless, it's not a very advanced economy. It's not an advanced military infrastructure. So it makes it very hard to really damage their ability. And as long as the smuggling routes that allow the Iranians to continue resupplying them with the equipment that they need, the Houthis have the capacity really to put up with almost any kind of air assault that we or coalition partners might launch.
It's interesting. A lot of people say the less digital, if you like, the enemy is, the harder it is for the more advanced nations with their digitized military to actually have kind of effective action against them.
Well, absolutely. And you can compare them in a sense to the Taliban in Afghanistan in the same kind of situation where the Houthis, although they're not popular in Yemen, there is not a strong sense that the Houthis are part of the fabric of Yemeni society, if you will, the way the Taliban were in Afghanistan. Nevertheless, they are integrated into Yemeni society. And of course, they know the terrain and they know the country better than anybody from the outside is going to know. And so this has allowed them really to survive after many, many years of conflict.
You've indicated their goal, is control in Yemen. Makes me ask, are the Houthis truly invested in the Palestinian cause, or is their support a campaign of convenience that boosts their own status and popularity in Yemen?
Well, I think it's a combination of those things. I think that historically, traditionally, the Palestinian cause is popular with Yemenis, and it cuts across the board. It's not just the Houthis; it's Yemenis in general have always been very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and so the Houthis see that their support for the Palestinians helps them build support and sympathy within Yemen. And that's an important aspect of what they're trying to accomplish. They're also, of course, part of the Iranian axis of resistance, along with Hamas and Hezbollah. And so part of what they're doing is a demonstration of loyalty to Iran and its other partners in the region. And so all of these things come together to help explain why the Houthis are carrying out these attacks.
Now, in your opinion, what is the current state of play between the Houthis and the Yemeni government? I mean, who's effectively running the country now?
Well, the country is divided more or less along the lines that existed prior to 1990. That is, that the Houthis control the northern part of the country, which is smaller geographically, but has about 70% of the Yemeni population. Whereas the government controls the south and the west or the east of the country, and much bigger part, much of it desert, and a smaller population. And those lines have been pretty static now for probably about 3 or 4 years.
What are the implications, Ambassador, of the recent agreement to suspend the financial arm wrestling between the Houthis and the government over the country's banking? And could that lead to a broader peace deal between the two parties?
Well, it's a possibility, although really, if you look, there were two components to the agreement. One, as you said, was to clean up, if you will, some of the issues that were arising over their conflict, their tug of war over the national banking system that was making business difficult both in the north and in the south. And then the other part of it was to smooth away some of the problems that the Yemeni airline, Haniyah, was confronting that was preventing it from continuing its flights. And so there was an agreement that Haniyah would be allowed to continue operating between Sana'a and Amman, Jordan, and then the agreement on the banking. There was hope that the UN had expressed that this perhaps could lead to re-engagement on the political side, but it's not clear whether that is going to happen or not. And then the other aspect, of course, is that the Saudis have been engaging with the Houthis for a period now of about 2 years, trying to work out some kind of a deal that would end Saudi engagement in the Yemen civil war and would also, as part of the deal, lead to some renewed political dialogue between the internationally recognized government and the Houthis.
So interesting, Ambassador, considering that Yemen has no significant wealth or resources and is not an influential country on the global stage, what makes it such a significant place for a conflict involving other regional players?
Well, it's strategically located, of course, at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. It borders Saudi Arabia. It has a long border with Saudi Arabia, as well as what we've seen over these past 10 months, which is its ability to interdict international shipping in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb. And of course, it's a large population compared to most of the Gulf states. It's about 30 million people, many of whom have worked in the various Gulf countries over a number of years. They're expatriate labor that has long had a foothold. And of course, for the Saudis, their ability, as we saw before the ceasefire went into effect in 2022, their ability to fire drones and missiles at Saudi cities and military installations in the south created difficulties, created strategic problems for Saudi Arabia, and so it is an issue that is concerning for regional stability as well as what's happening internally in Yemen.
Now, there are advocates for the Yemeni people who highlight that it's a country that's experienced one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises and is yet largely forgotten and left unassisted. Why is that?
Well, it's one of those things. It's a difficult news story to cover because there aren't a lot of international journalists who are present in Yemen. It's of course the north, the Houthi-controlled area is really a no-go zone, if you will, for international journalism, and so it's a difficult story to get out. It's been going on for a number of years. Malnutrition and other kinds of health issues and other kinds of social issues have plagued Yemen for many, many years, going back long before the outbreak of the Civil War. And so to a certain extent, this humanitarian crisis, although it's far worse than it used to be, nevertheless is part of the story of Yemen that people have experienced for many years.
You know, Ambassador, I'd like to tap into your broader capacity as an expert on Middle Eastern affairs and ask what you make of Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. and Vice President Kamala Harris's response to that.
Well, I think that there are a number of different ways of looking at this. I mean, in terms of Israel-U.S. relations, I think Netanyahu gave an extremely aggressive speech, a speech that was a very robust defense of Israeli tactics and strategy in the Gaza conflict up until now. He didn't really demonstrate much concern or interest in expanding the number of people who support what Israel is doing. He didn't really speak to the many hundreds of thousands or millions of people, not only here in the United States, but internationally, who are very concerned about the death and destruction in Gaza, the number of innocent victims, close to 40,000 now. In fact, quite the contrary, he was very aggressive towards people who challenged Israel's strategy and accused them of being pro-Hamas or even of being Iranian useful idiots, is a term that he actually used. So it was not a speech that was inclined to change the dynamics of the debate here in the U.S. or elsewhere. He spoke to the audience of people who are sympathetic to the Israeli position and not beyond that. Kamala Harris, of course, confronting the situation, and again, recognizing that we are deep into the presidential election year, understood that the very full support that President Biden has given to Israel has been problematic for him, particularly among more progressive, more left-wing elements of the Democratic Party. It's cost him support among Arab American populations, which are critical to him, particularly in the state of Michigan. And so Kamala Harris's meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu was an opportunity, really, for her to put a little bit of daylight between herself and the administration's approach. Not to say that she stepped away from support for Israel's security or the right of Israel to defend itself, but she did express concern about the Palestinian people, called for a ceasefire immediately, called for greater attention to the suffering of Palestinians, and that hopefully will allow her to reach out to those elements, particularly in the Democratic base, but even beyond that, who are disenchanted, if you will, with the Biden administration approach.
You know, it's interesting, Ambassador, we've spoken to a number of experts who know the region well, and like yourself, they watch what's going on. And some of them have said pretty much the only thing holding up the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal is Benjamin Netanyahu. Would you concur?
That certainly seems to be the through line, if you will, of what's going on. that when the two sides are moving closer to an agreement, we've seen a number of occasions where the U.S. negotiators have said that they expect that there's going to be an agreement. Then suddenly we see the Israelis imposing new demands that put the agreement farther away. So that is certainly part of what is going on, I think.
And in your opinion, sir, how dangerous are recent developments on Israel's border with Lebanon?
Well, and again, although we did see the administration trying to insert a little more balance, a little more calm into the situation yesterday with some comments, kind of casting doubt about whether the two sides were close to a conflict. What we've seen really over the last 10 months is this kind of steady ratcheting up of exchanges between Israel and Hezbollah. And so the concern is there, not so much in the sense that either side wants to see a conflict. I think the sense is that neither side really wants to go to war, and yet there is a concern that they might inadvertently cross red lines and make a war inevitable, if you will. And so the U.S., along with French and some others, have been working very hard to try to get the two sides to disengage, calm the situation, reduce tensions, so that we can move away from an open conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. But there are certainly people who are on both sides who are using pretty hot rhetoric that might unintentionally bring the two sides into open warfare.
So just a final thought then, with Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis in the mix, how concerned are you that we might be on the brink of a more intense regional conflict, an escalation that might well pull in other major global players?
Absolutely, and this is, of course, this is the worst case scenario. And the thing I think that's probably keeping the Biden administration up at night, which is that if there is a major Israeli aggression in Lebanon aimed at Hezbollah, it might bring the Iranians into the conflict as well. Although, again, our sense, our understanding, and there's been messaging going back and forth between Washington and Tehran throughout this period, and we don't believe that the Iranians want to see a conflict, but they will come to Hezbollah's defense if they believe that Hezbollah's security or its ability to carry on is threatened. So this is really what the deeper concern is about the situation on Israel's northern border.
And actually, it would leave Israel very stretched across a number of fronts if they do want to engage more seriously with Hezbollah and the Houthis as well as with Hamas, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that, the last time that Israel and Hezbollah went to a very serious military confrontation was in 2006. But since then, Hezbollah's ability, its capacity, its arsenal of missiles and drones is far, far more sophisticated and bigger than it was 18 years ago. And so we've even seen Israeli ministers saying that if there is a war between Israel and Hezbollah, that the Israelis don't have the capacity really to defend against Hezbollah's ability to strike at basic infrastructure at Israeli cities and Israeli military targets. And so it could be a far bloodier, far more lethal confrontation than we've ever seen in the past. And that, again, brings its own set of concerns, including whether that would inevitably mean that the U.S. would also need to become militarily engaged, not just in support of Israel.
Ambassador Gerald Firestein, thank you so much, sir, for your input.
It's been a pleasure, Riz.
We'll continue now with the escalating tension between Israel and Hezbollah. Israeli leaders have said that Hezbollah has crossed all the red lines by launching the missile that killed a dozen young people in the Golan Heights. And before the latest developments, I sat down with Benjamin Netanyahu's former national security advisor, General Yaakov Amidror, who now works with the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, as well as the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. He gave a frank and informed view of the dangers in store for both sides. General Amidror, thank you very much for your time. Conflict with Hezbollah on the northern front has been picking up and simmering for years, but it seems that the heat has been turned up in recent weeks. What could make this boil over into a full-scale war?
At the beginning, at the beginning of the war, we understood that Hamas and the Iranians decided not to join the war. They then began to the rise into Israel, the invasion of Israel on the ground, and they did begin strikes of Tel Aviv and so on. They decided to do something more like attrition near the borders and to keep it in a low fire. At the beginning, they decided to bring teams from other organizations, most of them Palestinians. All of them had been killed around the border fence. And then they intensify the use of missiles, rockets, anti-tank missiles, and so on and so forth. And it is, in many ways, it's a real estate war from that point of view. They succeeded to destroy many buildings and houses near the borders, but the success versus vis-a-vis the IDF is very, very low. We killed more than 370 members of Hezbollah, and they killed less than 30 in our side. So they have the feeling that they are contributing to the war in Gaza by doing something, but it is much less than what they can, and they understand it, and we understand it, and both sides do not want the war.
Assuming things do escalate, how would you expect such a war with Hezbollah to play out?
That is very clear for us. The intelligence that we have about Hezbollah is much better than what we had about Hamas. And we know how the war will look like. First of all, they will launch thousands of rockets and missiles into Israel. They can reach every place in Israel. They have around 100,000 rockets and missiles, more than, I think, any other country in the world, but maybe United States of America. So they can reach with rockets and missiles every point in Israel. And we have our anti-missile systems that we can use and to minimize the damage, but still the damage will be huge inside Israel. That is very clear for us. We know, at the same time, we know that the ground forces will have to face stronger forces than Hamas in Gaza, more sophisticated, more trained, with more anti-tank missiles and so on. So the war on the ground will be much more complicated than Gaza. But saying that, we have to remember, in the last 20 years, the IDF prepared itself for war in Lebanon. This is why we didn't have all the needed plans in Gaza, because we said all the time, the main enemy is in the north. This is the enemy that we will have to fight. So all the preparations of the IDF during the last 20 years had been on Lebanon, on Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we have much better intelligence. For example, we killed 2 of the 3 commanders of the south of Hezbollah. Hezbollah had 3 commanders to control the south part of Lebanon. So we have much better intelligence than what we had in the 7th of October about Gaza. So yes, it is going to be a long war, very devastating for Lebanon, for sure, very devastating for us. But the preparations that we did and the intelligence that we have and the targeting list that we have probably can guarantee that at the end, the damage for Hezbollah will be superb.
General, you talk about 20 years of preparation, but how has the use of drones changed the nature of warfare in recent years in the region? Hezbollah released detailed drone footage identifying a series of potential military and infrastructure targets in Israel. So the equation's changing a bit.
I don't think that it will change the equation. It will make more problems. We will suffer more damage, but the equation itself will not change. It's not strong enough to change the equation. And we have some means how to deal with this threat. It's not good enough. We have to make it much better for the future. It's one of the challenges that we are facing, but that will not change the equation. It will be one side of the equation will be more problematic from our point of view, but it's not changed the equation.
Okay, so just weeks ago, Iran directly launched a huge salvo of missiles against Israel following the killing of senior members of Iran's Revolutionary Guards in Syria, now widely believed to be a result of an Israeli strike. The attack was largely foiled by Israel's Iron Dome air defense system, but to what extent was that attack a face-saving gesture for Iran, or do you believe it might threaten to make the war with Hezbollah even more dangerous?
I think that what the Iranian use is what they have. They don't have any surprises other than what they launch. Here and there they can make some, and enhance some of their weapon systems, but what they use is what they have. But we have to take into consideration that it will not be as easy in the future as it was in April. Because in April it was only Iran, and here we will have to fight parallel Hezbollah and Iran. And we don't have the coalition which helped Israel to deal with the threat. But at the same time, you have to remember that our reaction to that was very, very minimal, just to signal to the Iranians, guys, we know how to reach you in very, very sensitive points, and you don't have the means to stop us. And they have to take into consideration what surprises they will face if they do what you just mentioned. So I'm not sure that the Iranians will run for such a confrontation. They know that Israel has huge capabilities which haven't been used up till now. And what we signal them, only one signal of what we have. And I'm not sure that the Iranians will be ready to take the risk to save the Shiite Arab of Lebanon, taking the risk for the Shiite Iranians in Tehran.
Now, I've heard the phrase, Hezbollah wins if it doesn't lose, but Israel loses if it doesn't win. Is that a fair comment?
It's a fair comment, and this is why all the preparations that we did are focusing on bringing Hezbollah to a big loss. I mean, we cannot, unlike Hamas, which can be eradicated totally within a year, Hezbollah is not in the same situation. Lebanon is not Gaza. We cannot isolate the area as we are isolating today Gaza. We don't have the same means to do it in Lebanon. But we can bring Hezbollah to a level in which any attempt by the Iranians or Hezbollah to rebuild itself in the future, Israel will have in a position to destroy immediately, because the deterrence that Hezbollah built through the years will not work anymore against Israel, because of the level of capabilities that we can lead Hezbollah to in our war. So the war in Lebanon is not about eliminating Hezbollah. That is too big on Israel. We cannot do it. It's not Gaza. What we have to achieve is something different. Is the ability to act freely after the war in Lebanon without hesitating because of the deterrence that the Hezbollah has. Hezbollah had a deterrence, and we didn't make any big attacks or raids in strikes in Lebanon. In the future, this is the name of the game. How we build the ability to strike Lebanon to strike Hamas, also Hezbollah in the future, without being deterred by what Hezbollah will have after the war.
General, Israel's actions in Gaza has created some emotional distance with some of its allies. Now, if there is a more serious conflict with Iran, how far would Israel expect or hope to rely on support from the West and possibly even from regional allies in the Middle East?
At the end of the day, it's very sad to say, the world is not ready to fight. The world, the Western countries lost their stamina. This is why they didn't make anything to Assad when he used chemical weapons. This is why there was no any reaction when President of the United States said don't, and the Iranians launched 300 projectiles against Israel. This is why the Hamas could survive in Gaza when everyone saw what is happening there and no one was ready to interfere and to stop it. We understand at the end, it's a burden that Israel will have to take. And we have to prepare ourselves to take the burden. And we know it for many years and we are very sad about it and very frustrated, the West is not ready to act.
But General, isn't the West's reaction in response to what has been a massive loss of civilian life in Gaza through the actions of the Israeli military?
I think that the proportion between terrorists which had been killed versus civilians in Gaza is much better than any battle that I know in the modern times since the Second World War. If you speak about Afghanistan, if you speak about Mosul, if you speak about all those places in which the West fought terrorists, the ratio between the number of terrorists that had been killed is in Gaza much better, not better, much better than any other battlefield that I know. I met few generals from Western countries in the last a few weeks, and I asked them if they have another way to fight the war. And all of them admitted that they don't know. They don't have how to do it better than the IDF. In some cases, say, we cannot do it in the same level of capacity of the IDF. We know that many more civilians would have been killed if it was our army and not the IDF. So I understand the frustration around the world, many casualties within the civilians in Gaza, but knowing, I think, all the battles against terrorists around the world since the Second World War, no one did it better than us.
Is there a real comparison, though, of what's happening in Gaza compared with any other battle that's taken place? There hasn't really been anything anywhere near the equivalent of a group of people locked in this way. The situation, can it be compared, really, realistically? I don't think many people would say it would.
Of course not. No, of course cannot be compared. No one did what Hamas did in 7th of October. Raping women, killing children, babies, taking into Gaza a child at the age of 9 months. And we don't know what happened to him. What Hamas did in 7th of October is no one, we don't have any equivalent in the modern time. It's atrocities in the level of the barbarian forces of the 10th century. You are right, you cannot compare it to anything when you take the atrocities of Hamas, which was the beginning of the war, just to remind you. So you are right, it cannot be compared.
So let me ask you then, as former Director of Intelligence Analysis, who do you hold responsible for the lack of foresight which allowed that October the 7th Hamas attack on Israel?
Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, is responsible for the war, is responsible for attacking Israel. If you ask who is responsible for the lack of alarm in the Israeli side, we are investigating, and the picture is not clear yet. And within few months, probably we'll have a better answer to the question. It was, unfortunately, the whole system collapsed. The intelligence didn't work, the operational side didn't work. We understand that it was a huge failure of the IDF and the intelligence system. We are investigating, and we will find all the answers to the question, and we will be better in the future. I grew up after the 73 war, in which, at the first week, nothing worked. But the war was ended 100 kilometers from Cairo and 36 kilometers from Damascus. So I knew, and I know that there are such circumstances. The main question is not how it is happened. The main question is what we are learning for it and how we will be better at it.
Well, so let me ask you then, if you were still running the IDF at the time of the October 7th attacks, what response would you have counselled?
I think that the response that the IDF provided is a good one. You have to go into Gaza that way or another way. You know, the best plan is the one which was not implemented. So everyone has remarks about the plan which was used by the IDF. But at the end, the logic was right. We have to go, in this case, to eradicate all remnants of Hamas, to kill all the leadership of Hamas, to destroy the infrastructure of Hamas, to go after those who invaded Israel the 7th of October, one by one, and kill them. No one of them will survive. We have to go after the leadership of Hamas here in Gaza and in other places. Hamas will be at the end of the day a footnote in the books of history. We will destroy Hamas military capabilities to the level that Hamas will not be a threat to Israel. As an idea, maybe some Palestinians will keep it, but as a military threat, it will not exist anymore in the future.
Well, I'm wondering, is that realistic, though? You know, is that aim of totally wiping out Hamas even achievable?
Why not? I mean, if we will have enough time, we will do it. And we are doing it. Every day, we are killing hundreds of them.
At the same time, you're creating more people whose ideology is now directly against Israel, the chance of having some kind of peace.
This, with all due respect, your question is not a logical one, because it happened before the 7th of October, so it will continue after the 7th of October. But in this case, it will be clear to everyone that those who are attacking Israel will be eradicated. I mean, they did it before the 7th of October. They joined Hamas. They did the atrocities of the 10th century in the 21st century in the 7th of October. So this is the Middle East. We have to understand that this is the Middle East, but at least now the price is clear to those who might consider it in the future. That if someone is crossing the red line, like they did in the 7th of October, all of them will be killed, and everything which belongs to Hamas will be destroyed.
General, you're a military man now. When you're an active member of the armed forces, you're expected to commit to the cause and follow orders. But with a degree of separation from the front lines, are you able to at all take a step back and judge the impact of the IDF's actions?
It's very bad that we have to make the people of Gaza going out of their homes. Many of them will find destroyed homes, then they will come back. Many of them lost their relatives. We are more than sorry about it, but we had been attacked by Hamas, a Palestinian organization which is part of Gaza life and society. Hamas was elected by the Palestinians. The Palestinians supported Hamas. And Hamas, all the leadership of Hamas was born in Gaza and grew up in Gaza. If they are not ready to take responsibility and to think about their own people, do you want us to take responsibility and to think about our enemy, which just butchered us, our civilians, our women, our babies, that we will be responsible for that? It's their responsibility. Ask them the question.
Let me ask you then, General, are you able to any degree to understand why the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister have been named by the International Criminal Court as suspected war criminals, along, of course, with several Hamas leaders? Can you understand that perspective?
Yes, we have a long experience of anti-Semitism around the world, and this is another example of it. And I was not surprised, by the way. I told you from the beginning, don't worry, the international legal system is not connected at all to justice or legal system. It is another tool of our enemies, and it will be used against Israel. I told it from day one.
But is it fair to call it anti-Semitism each time? Because this, even if it hadn't been in Israel, if that had been used as a tool by the International Criminal Court, it would be irrespective.
I mean, look at the last 20 years. Did they the same to Assad? Did the same to Putin? Did the same the same to the ruler of North Korea? Did the same the same to the ruler of Yemen? Did the same to the Houthis? Did the same to the rulers of Iran? Well, guys, look at the situation in the world and ask yourself, why the Israelis? From all these despots around the world, which killed much more people than Israel. Why Israel is signaled out? not the rulers of Sudan? No one. It's anti-Semitism, clear anti-Semitism, and we understand it, we know it. It is, we're born in a world in which anti-Semitism is part of the culture. And this is another example, that's all. Now it's Israel, in the past it was Jews, it's okay.
Well, let me ask you, so what did you make, as a military man, of the outrage expressed at the behavior of some of the IDF soldiers who forced Palestinians in Gaza to lie on the burning hot bonnets, the hoods of their military vehicles during an operation? What went through your mind?
All those who violated the law should be taken to court and punished. No question, no hesitation. If it is against the law, they have to be punished. But Israel is a state in which the legal system is very strong. Some people will tell you it's too strong, but very strong. And anyone will be identified, and what he did was against the law, will be punished.
Irrespective of what you said about anti-Semitism globally, sir, the US and some European nations have experienced substantial protests against their government support for Israel's military operation. Pro-Palestinian candidates even won a number of seats in the recent UK elections. And in the US, support for Israel could harm the Democrats' chances of winning key battleground states in the upcoming presidential election. Now, the US has postponed several shipments of weapons to Israel, but Prime Minister Netanyahu still seems unready to heed the red lines expressed by Washington, D.C. How damaging is that to Israel's military capabilities at a time when the prospect of war with Hezbollah, for example, appears to be looming larger than ever?
No question that the Muslim forces around the world are stronger now than many years ago. They lost the weapon of oil, but they have the weapon of numbers and money. And more Muslims in Britain, and more Muslims in America, and more Muslims in France. We know it. We understand that the world is changing, and we will have to face a different world in which Muslim forces will be stronger in the future, and money from countries like Qatar will make the difference in many universities. And we have the experience of being in such situation when the oil was the main weapon of the Muslim countries 50 years ago.
But General, you've made it a Muslim-Jewish issue when many of the protests around the world were basically Christians. Jews even joined the protests because for them it was a war issue, a military issue, or a land issue,
yes,
not a religious one.
You are right. You are right. But the majority still are Muslims. You are right. There are many non-Muslims, but the majority is still Muslims, and the leaders are Muslims. And yes, we have other problems. It's not just Muslims. There are other problems and other reasons to hate Israel. About the American, how to call it, stopping some of the shipments of weapons. It's bad for Israel. We are doing whatever we can to influence the administration, and I hope that these problems will be solved. We understand that it is a very delicate time in America. America is in the middle of an election year, towards the end of the election year, and it's democracy, and we understand that there are some constraints even to the administration in Washington. We hope that that will be ended within the few next months.
General, I'll wrap up with this then. You've written extensively on intelligence, strategy and conflict in the Middle East. In 2015, you wrote a memorandum titled Perfect Storm, The Implications of Middle East Chaos, in which you were pessimistic about the prospects for peace in the region. To what extent have recent events changed your views in any way?
As you remember, that was towards the high peak of the Arab Spring, when people around the world, including very important writers in the New York Times, had many expectations about changing the Middle East towards being another Europe. And the Arab Spring was supposed to be the beginning of the process. Nothing of that had happened. There is not even one democracy in the Middle East. If you count Turkey as a democracy, there is one. There is very few liberal societies in the Middle East, if at all. So I was pessimistic in 2015. I'm pessimistic now. Now I see something different. There are three issues which are different than 2015. One, Iran is closer to the nuclear bomb. and nuclear umbrella for Iran will make the Middle East even more problematic place. The second is I thought then that the religion sentiment will not be as strong as I understand it is today. And what we saw with Hamas is another signal of it, but you have to look at the elections in Egypt, in which the Muslim Brotherhood won 54% of the voters. Look at the situation in other countries in the Middle East. Still, Tunisia, for example, which was probably the one which was close to democracy, and then it is over. And the fact that more countries understand that they cannot trust any superpower from the outside to make what is needed to defend them or to change the situation. They have to build alliances inside the Middle East to deal with the problems of the Middle East, and they cannot trust someone from outside to solve the problems.
General Yaakov Amidror, thank you so much.
You are most welcome.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of the show. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.